All right, so today we're going to talk about something huge. We're talking about a fundamental upgrade to your mental operating system. It's a whole new way to think about change, about commitment, and about that critical moment when you have to decide whether to change course. This is all about moving from a rigid, brittle mindset to one that's actually built for evolution.
Okay, let's get right into it by defining the hidden enemy. It's called the sunk cost fallacy, and honestly, it's one of the most deceptive bugs hardwired into our thinking. It's that deep, biological urge, that nagging voice in your head that says, hey, you can't stop now. Look at all the time, all the money, all the energy you've already sunk into this. It literally traps you in a failing strategy, not because the strategy is any good, but simply because you've already paid the price of admission.
And because of that fallacy, this is how almost everyone sees a pivot. When you change direction, they see it as an admission of defeat. They see it as you admitting your first idea was just wrong. It's treated like a retreat, a total failure. But that perspective, it's not just wrong, it's critically flawed.
Because for anyone trying to operate at a truly high level, the real failure isn't pivoting. No way. The real catastrophic failure is stubbornly sticking to a plan that reality has already told you is obsolete. See, clinging to a failing strategy isn't commitment, it's a complete breakdown of high-performance psychology.
So this is where we have to make the shift. We have to completely reframe what it means to change your mind. This isn't about quitting. It's not about giving up. It's about intelligently adapting to new information. We've got to shift our entire mental framework from seeing it as failure to seeing it as evolution. And this just lays it out perfectly. It's a linguistic and a mental upgrade. You're not quitting, you're performing a systemic recalibration. You're not just blindly holding the line, you are optimizing the vector towards your actual goal. You stop being a path-dependent victim, totally trapped by your past decisions, and you step up to become a strategic architect, actively designing your future.
You know, we've had it drilled into our heads our whole lives that consistency is this amazing virtue. And sometimes it is. But this quote, it just reveals the dangerous shadow side of it, doesn't it? If you're heading straight for a cliff, being consistent just means you get there faster. It's an incredibly efficient way to arrive at a dead end.
So this right here, this is the core software update for your brain. You have to shift your allegiance. It's all about moving from an emotional loyalty to the plan to a logical loyalty to the objective. Think about it this way. The plan is just a car. If the car breaks down on the way to your destination, you don't stay with it out of some weird loyalty to the car. You get out and find a new way to get where you're going.
Okay, so if this shift makes so much logical sense, why is it so damn hard to do? Why does pivoting so often feel like a total collapse instead of a smart evolutionary step? Well, the answer lies in the rigidity trap. The problem is something we call strategic rigidity. And what happens is many of us build our careers, our companies, our projects like these giant monolithic statues. They look amazing, right? They're impressive, they look solid, permanent. But the second the ground shifts, when the market changes, when new data comes in, that very rigidity becomes a fatal flaw. A statue can't bend, it can only shatter. And this quote, man, it just perfectly captures how absurd this rigid thinking really is. It's like you're out there trying to navigate a brand new ocean, but you're using an old, outdated map. And instead of drawing a new map that matches reality, you're just standing there, yelling at the ocean for not matching what's on your paper. It's an absolute recipe for disaster. And make no mistake, this rigidity isn't a single issue. Oh no, it creates a whole cascade of failures. It leads to path dependency, where your past choices literally imprison your future options. It creates operational drag, where you're forced to keep propping up old, inefficient systems. This leads to structural fragility, where you become terrified of any change because you know the whole thing might just shatter. And what's the end result? Strategic paralysis. You're just frozen, watching the world race by.
So how do we break out of this trap? It's simple, but it's profound. We have to stop building statues, period. We need to start engineering systems that are designed for fluidity, that expect to change right from the very beginning. We have to architect for agility.
And the key, the real secret sauce, is building modular systems. Think of your skills, your capital, your team, not as one single statue, but as a collection of interchangeable Lego blocks. This architecture allows you to separate your core logic, that's your universal fundamental value, from the contextual application, which is just the temporary project you're applying it to right now.
And when you get this, your whole relationship with change flips on its head. As you can see, you move from the terrifying idea of having to rebuild from scratch to simply refactoring the parts you already have. It's no longer a dreaded reset that wipes out all your hard work, but a powerful systemic upgrade. You stop fearing change and you start actively looking for ways to exploit it. The core logic stays, you just swap out the application. And in this new world, that agility, it isn't just a nice to have. It's everything. You become the speedboat that can effortlessly run circles around the giant, slow-moving cargo ship. Your ability to turn on a dime becomes your single greatest competitive advantage. All right, that's the big idea. But theory is one thing, practice is another. How do we actually do this? Let's get practical and translate this powerful idea into a concrete, executable protocol. Think of it as your turn engine for making these strategic shifts. It's a 3-step engine. First, you run a decoupling audit. You have to clearly separate your timeless assets, your core skills, your network, from their temporary application. Second, you do vector testing. Before you bet the farm on a new direction, you run small, cheap experiments, or probes, to get real data. You have to prioritize that data over your gut feelings or assumptions. And finally, step 3 is systemic integration. Once the data validates the new path, you migrate your core modules, your Lego blocks, to that new objective with maximum speed and confidence. Look, at the end of the day, this is all about aligning who you are with what you do. It's about aligning your actions and your systems with your true potential for dynamic, fluid adaptation. You possess a high-bandwidth mind capable of complex thought. Your system should reflect that. It's time to stop being a statue, fixed and fragile, and start being a stream, powerful and relentlessly adaptable. So I'll leave you with this choice, because it really is a choice. How are you designing your system, your career, your life? Is it designed to be rigid, impressive from a distance, but ultimately brittle? Or is it designed to be fluid, adaptable, and unstoppable in a world that never stops changing? The choice is yours. Are you a statue, or are you a stream?
You ever wonder why so many brilliant plans, ambitious companies, and even entire empires just fail? It's usually not what you think. It's not a lack of commitment or one single bad decision. No, it's something much more subtle. A silent flaw, really, baked right into their architecture that causes them to crumble from the inside out. We're going to call this strategic rigidity.
So, let's really dig into this question, right? Why do they shatter? Because if you can understand the answer, you're on your way to building something that can actually last, whether that's a company, a career, or even just a big life goal. We love to blame failure on not trying hard enough, a lack of willpower. But the real reason is often so much deeper than that. It's this hidden flaw, a crack in the very foundation of the plan itself. And that crack makes the whole thing incredibly fragile, ready to break under pressure at the exact moment it needs to be flexible.
To really get a handle on this, we have to look inward first. We're going to start by breaking down a really common psychological bias that traps almost all of us in failing strategies. Think of it like a deceptive little bug in our own mental operating system.
And here it is, that internal bug in action, the sunk cost fallacy. You know that feeling, right? You're an hour into a truly terrible movie, but you keep watching just because you've already invested the time. That's it. It's this biological urge to just keep pouring resources into a failing direction simply because of what you've already spent. It makes changing course feel physically painful, even when every single sign is screaming at you to do it.
Now this is a really powerful mental shift. We're basically taught to see any kind of pivot as quitting, right? It's an admission of defeat. But a much, much better way to look at it is as a systemic recalibration. You're not giving up. You're just being smart and adapting based on new information you're getting from the world.
So here's the crucial point. We're told that consistency is this great virtue. And it can be. But being consistent when you're pointed in the wrong direction, well, that's just a highly efficient way to drive straight into a wall. That's when consistency stops being a virtue and becomes a vice.
Okay, so how does this little psychological bug inside our heads create such a massive external problem? Let's take a look at what we call the rigidity crisis. This is where that sunk cost fallacy really starts to show up in our strategies, our companies, and our big projects.
This image just captures the danger of strategic rigidity perfectly. We build our plans like these huge monolithic statues. They look grand, they're impressive, but they are completely unable to adapt. So when the ground inevitably shifts underneath them, and it always does, they can't bend. They can only break.
This trap actually has a name in systems thinking.
It's called path dependency. And it basically means that the decisions you made in the past are now severely limiting your options for the future. You become locked into a strategy, even when reality has moved on and made it completely useless.
So how do you spot this rigidity in your own work? Well, you have to look for the symptoms. First, there's operational drag. That's that feeling of being anchored to old tools or old habits, just because that's how we've always done it. This then creates structural fragility, where you become absolutely terrified to change anything for fear the whole Jenga tower will just collapse. And that leads to the final stage, strategic paralysis. You're just frozen, totally unable to act, watching the world just pass you by.
And this is the perfect metaphor for what happens when you're architecture blind. You can see that your map doesn't match the world around you, but instead of drawing a new map, you get angry at the world. You literally start blaming the ocean for not matching your piece of paper.
Okay, so we've diagnosed the problem of strategic rigidity. Now, let's get into the solution. And it requires a completely different way of building our plans and our systems, one that intentionally includes what we'll call flex joints. The core idea here is to shift from building a giant monolithic brick to building with something more like Legos. See, instead of one solid, fragile block, a modular system is a collection of interchangeable parts. And that is the secret to agility. When one piece isn't working anymore, you can just swap it out without tearing down the entire structure.
Now, this requires a pretty major mindset shift. You have to learn to separate your core logic, that's your unique skills, your team, your capital, from its contextual application, which is just your current product or market. So think of it this way. Your ability to cook is your core logic. The specific restaurant you open, that's the context. If the restaurant fails, you don't suddenly lose your ability to cook. A pivot isn't a reset. It's a systemic upgrade. You're just redeploying your core assets into a new, better context.
All right, let's get practical. How do you actually do this? We need to install a new operating system for making these changes effectively. Let's look at the protocol for building what we'll call a turn engine right into your strategy.
This protocol is your practical turn engine. So, step one is the audit. You have to get crystal clear on what's your core value versus its temporary context. Step two is to test. Before you go all in on a big change, you run small, low-cost experiments. Think of them like little probes to gather real-world data on a new direction. And finally, step three is integration. Once a new path is validated by your tests, you move your core assets to that new objective with speed and with confidence. This is how you change direction without losing all your momentum.
Let's just summarize this whole journey, because what we're really talking about here is a total transformation. It's about shedding a fragile old identity and adopting a powerful new one.
This is the state of being we're trying to escape, right? The grand but brittle statue. It looks impressive from a distance, but really it's vulnerable, just waiting to crack under the slightest unexpected pressure. And this is the goal. This is the new identity we're aiming for, to stop being a statue and start being a stream. A stream is adaptable, it's resilient, and it's pretty much unstoppable. It doesn't break when it hits an obstacle, it just flows around it, always moving towards its objective. So I'll leave you with this question. Take a good, hard look at your own 10-year plan. Is it a roadmap, or is it a suicide mission? Is it built like a brittle statue, or is it built like an unstoppable stream? Because in a world that is constantly changing, a plan without any flex joints isn't really a plan at all. It's just a monument to a future that's never going to arrive.
You know that feeling, right? When you've stuck with a bad idea for way too long just because you've already invested so much time or money into it? Well, that feeling is exactly why we're here today. We're going to talk about the pivot, but we're going to reframe it completely. Forget pivot as a sign of failure. We're going to treat it as one of the most powerful strategic tools you have. Let's dive in and see how changing direction is actually the key to winning.
So, here's our game plan. First, we'll tackle the sunk cost trap, that little mental glitch that keeps us holding on. Then we'll look at the architecture of rigidity, why the very systems we build make change feel impossible. After that, we get to the solution, architecting for modularity. This leads to a whole new way of thinking we call the refactored direction. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with the pivot protocol, a simple, actionable framework you can use to make these smart changes happen.
All right, first things first. Before we can even talk about pivoting, we have to deal with the biggest barrier standing in our way. And it's not a competitor, it's not the market. It's a trap inside our own minds. It's a bug in our own operating system that keeps us locked into a failing strategy. You know, we're always told that consistency is a virtue. Stay the course, hold the line.
But what if that's just terrible advice sometimes? I mean, what if being consistent in the wrong direction is just a really efficient way to drive straight into a wall? This is the core problem we need to rewire in our thinking.
And the name of this culprit is the sunk cost fallacy. Seriously, think of it like a piece of faulty code in our neural OS. It's that nagging little voice that says, well, I've already put so much effort into this. It's a deep biological urge that tricks us into throwing good money, good time, and good energy after bad. So this is the crucial reframe we need to make. The old mindset calls a change of plans quitting, but an unordinary mind sees it for what it is, a systemic recalibration. See, you're not abandoning the mission, you're just updating the strategy to actually win. This means shifting from an emotional loyalty to your old plan to a purely logical loyalty to your ultimate objective. Okay, so let's say we've gotten past that psychological trap. We're ready to change, but then we hit the next wall, a structural one. This is why making a change feels so catastrophic, why it feels like the whole system is about to shatter into a million pieces. Think about it like this. Most of our ventures, our careers, our big plans, they're built like these giant monolithic statues. They look grand, they look impressive from the outside, but the second the ground shifts, boom, they crack and crumble. Why? Because they have absolutely zero flexibility built in. This is what we call strategic rigidity. And that rigidity creates this really dangerous state called path dependency. All it means is that your past decisions have locked you onto a single, narrow track, severely limiting what you can do in the future. It's like you're trying to navigate a new city, but you refuse to use a new map. Instead, you just get angry that the city doesn't match your outdated chart. And the consequences of this are pretty severe. You get operational drag, which means you're forced to keep propping up old, clunky systems that don't work anymore. You develop structural fragility, this constant low-level fear that one wrong move will bring the whole house of cards down. And ultimately, that all leads to strategic paralysis, where you're just frozen, watching the world change right in front of you. So if being a rigid statue is the problem, what's the solution? Well, it's not about being bigger or stronger. It's about being more adaptable. It's about fundamentally changing how we build our empires from the ground up, using what we call a modular architecture. And here it is, the big breakthrough idea. You have to decouple your system. You need to separate your core logic, the permanent, universal assets you have, from the contextual application, which is always temporary. For instance, your skills, that's your core logic. The specific job you're in, that's just a contextual application. Your capital is core. The single product you're invested in is just context. Once you see this, you realize you can swap out the context without ever losing your core value. Now, this modular approach, it completely changes the game. It lets you move in what this framework calls the refactored direction. You're no longer thinking about having to reset and start all over again. Instead, you're just thinking about upgrading. Just look at the incredible difference this makes. Before, a pivot meant rebuilding. It meant tearing everything down and starting from scratch, losing all your momentum. But now you're just refactoring. You're swapping out one module for another, like changing a tire instead of scrapping the whole car. You get to change direction while keeping all your forward momentum. This is the very definition of strategic agility.
And this, right here, this is the key takeaway. A pivot is no longer a reset button that erases all your progress. It's a systematic upgrade that actually makes your entire operation stronger and way more resilient for whatever comes next.
And this is where it gets really, really powerful. Because once you adopt this modular way of thinking, you stop seeing change as a threat you have to defend against. You start seeing it as an opportunity you can actively exploit. Suddenly, your ability to turn on a dime becomes your greatest competitive moat.
All right, so we've got the theory, we've got the mindset. Now let's get practical. Let's translate all of this into a concrete execution plan, what the source material calls the turn engine for your strategic shifts.
The protocol is basically 3 simple steps. First, you run a decoupling audit. You figure out what is truly core versus what is just context, and you tie your identity to that core. Step 2 is vector testing. Don't just guess, test. You run small, cheap experiments to gather real data on whether a new direction has legs. Then step 3 is systemic integration. Once the data validates the new path, you commit. You migrate your core modules, your team, your capital, your brand, and you go all in with maximum speed.
When you really boil it all down, the entire mental shift can be summarized with this one simple but really profound instruction. Stop being a statue, rigid, fragile, and static. Start being a stream, fluid, adaptable, and powerful.
And that brings us to our final thought. As you look at your own career, your own business, your own life, ask yourself this question. Your strategy is set, but is it a fortress that's protecting you, or is it a cage that's trapping you?
Let's talk about the pivot. You know that moment, that sinking feeling when you realize the path you're on might just be a dead end, but you've already invested so much time, energy, and money. So how do you change course without torching everything you've built? That's what we're digging into today.
But first, you gotta ask, why? Why do we do this? Why do we stick with bad decisions? I mean, all the data could be screaming at you, the warning lights are flashing red, but you just keep going. It feels almost impossible to just stop. What is going on there?
Well, it turns out it's not really a character flaw. It's more like a bug in our mental operating system. It's called the sunk cost fallacy. It's this deep, almost biological urge to keep pouring resources into a losing bet simply because of what you've already put in. That little voice in your head saying, I can't quit now, I've come too far. Yeah, that's the trap.
So, let's dive right in. Section 1, the sunk cost trap. We're going to expose this deceptive little bug in your neural OS. See, here's the root of the problem. Society teaches us that a pivot is just a fancy word for failure. It's admitting you were wrong. But the unordinary mind, the high-performance mind, sees it completely differently. It's not defeat, it's a systemic recalibration. It's an intelligent, strategic adjustment based on new, better information. And this comparison just lays it out perfectly. The old mindset is all about emotional loyalty to a plan you made last year. It's about holding the line no matter what. The unordinary mind, it has logical loyalty to the objective. The goal is what matters, not the path. It's not about holding the line, it's about optimizing the vector, finding the quickest, smartest route to your target. In this new world, adaptation isn't a weakness, it's the ultimate virtue. And this is so crucial because being stubborn about a failing plan isn't just inefficient, it's actually incredibly dangerous. Which brings us to our second section, the curse of rigidity, or why your precious master plan might actually be a suicide mission. So what does this curse look like in the real world? Well, it starts with something called path dependency. Your old choices are boxing you in, limiting what you can do next. That creates operational drag, where you're just burning energy and resources keeping old, clunky systems alive. And all of this leads to structural fragility, this gut-wrenching fear that if you change just one thing, the whole house of cards will come crashing down. And the end result? Total strategic paralysis. You're just frozen, a deer in the headlights, while the world races past you. I absolutely love this quote because it captures the insanity of it all perfectly. Imagine this. You're trying to navigate a new ocean with an old map, and instead of just drawing a new map, you're getting angry and blaming the ocean for not being where it's supposed to be. That's exactly what strategic rigidity is. It's blaming reality because it doesn't match your outdated plan. Okay, so if being rigid is the curse, then agility has to be the cure, which brings us to Section 3, architecting for agility. And we do this by building modular systems. Now, this might be the most important concept we cover. I want you to start thinking of everything you do, your business, your career, your project, like a big set of Legos. You've got your core logic, right? These are your most valuable universal pieces, your skills, your brand, your team, your capital. Then you've got the contextual application. That's just the specific thing you've built with those Legos for now. The key, the absolute game changer, is learning to see these two things as totally separate. Because when you think this way, a pivot stops being this big, scary reset button that blows everything up. No, it's simply taking apart the Lego castle because you realize what you really need is a spaceship. You're not starting from scratch. You're just upgrading the design. You're redeploying your best assets in a much more powerful configuration. All right, so we've got the mindset down and we've got the architecture. Now you need the actual playbook. So, Section 4, the pivot protocol. Think of this as the turn engine for your entire system. The protocol itself is beautifully simple. It's just 3 steps. First, you execute a decoupling audit. Second, you apply vector testing. And third, you perform systemic integration. Let's break down exactly how each one works. Step 1 is the decoupling audit. This is where you have to be brutally honest with yourself. Get out a piece of paper and draw a line down the middle.
On one side, list your core assets, the timeless, valuable stuff like your skills, your team, your brand. On the other side, list the context, the temporary things like your current project or your specific product. Here's the most critical part. You must tie your identity, your ego, to the core, not the context. Who you are is your skills, not the project you're working on today. Next up, step 2, vector testing. Look, before you go all in and bet the entire farm on a new direction, you send out what we call probes. These are just small, cheap, fast experiments. Their only job is to come back with data. This is how you bypass that faulty gut feeling and force your brain to prioritize hard data over your old, dusty assumptions.
And that brings us to the final step, step 3, systemic integration. The moment your data, your little probes, come back and validate the new path, you go. And you go hard. No hesitation, no second guessing. You migrate all of those core Lego blocks, your people, your capital, your brand, and you execute towards the new objective with maximum possible speed. So, when you put all of this together, the right mindset, a modular architecture, and this 3-step protocol, something really profound starts to happen. And that's our final section, moving from a statue to a stream by activating your high bandwidth mind. And really, this quote says it all. You have to stop being a statue. Yeah, a statue can be impressive and strong, but it's also rigid, it's brittle, and it's stuck in one place. It shatters under pressure. Instead, you need to become a stream. A stream is dynamic, it's powerful, and it is always adapting to the terrain to find the path forward. You possess a high bandwidth mind. It's time to let it flow.
So the big takeaway here is pretty simple. Change is inevitable. It's going to happen whether you like it or not. But whether that change breaks you, well, that's a choice. And now you have the tools to build systems that don't just survive change, but actually get stronger from it. So it's time. Stop resisting, start architecting.